Well, sure. Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate speaking today. Nuclear networking is really taking people from never doing networking before, maybe a little shy, maybe an introvert like I was in my first career transition, and the ways that I kind of forced myself to not only network effectively, but network effectively enough to land my next role. Because as you probably know, if you're a professional or above, that's probably your lion's share of your time that you should be focused on. So we talked a little, introduce myself. I'm currently the Vice President of Operations, Manufacturing and Supply Chain here at Onto. We are a capital equipment manufacturing publicly traded company, about 550 million in sales. I'm responsible for 8 factories across the U.S., probably about 400 to 500 employees of the 1,600 employee company, and about $220 million in supply chain spend. Like myself, I've been in 2 career transitions, and halfway through my first one, I figured out, hey, there's a process. There is no book out there that says this is what you should consider from the time that you left your last role, whether you've been fired, laid off, or et cetera, to the time that you land your next role, and all the things that you should consider. So really, the book is meant very simplistically, a quick read, 133 pages, I think, and it gives you kind of a roadmap to landing your next role. So nuclear networking, what you guys are going to learn today here is, what is networking? How do you get your brand straight? Because we all have a personal brand, whether we have one developed or not, it's there. Value proposition, kind of how you introduce yourself to your network, your meetings, as opposed to the old elevator pitch, which I'm not a proponent of. Then, of course, the roadmap to networking, kind of identifying who are you in the scope of introvert versus extrovert. And if you are an introvert, what are the ways to get to at least maybe a social introvert? Basically developing a day in the life for yourself. This is part of one of the topics I have in my book. And then, what angles should you explore when you're out there networking? How to get all the connections you possibly can, the meaningful ones, and then just making sure that you show up genuinely interested in folks. How do you follow up, which is really key. I think a lot of people don't know that there's time fences to those follow-ups. And then you want to make sure that you create yourself, a wow factor at every particular process step. I always tell people is that there's always an opportunity to leave people a great impression. And always be yourself because everybody else is taken. Nuclear networking, what is it? What is it not? So a lot of times people tend to get in their mode if they've not known what networking is. And mostly people who are in career transitions the first time, they kind of just stay as, I'm going to collect business cards like right here. Like I got a box full of them right here, right? But it's a little bit more than that. It's not just a one and done thing too. A lot of times people will meet with somebody or they'll get introduced to somebody. They'll talk to them for about 20 minutes and then they'll never hear from them again, right? And then I also tell it's not all about you, especially the first meeting. And we'll talk a little bit about that, what networking is, your first meeting, your ongoing meetings. But what it is, it's really truly connecting and getting common interests. And we'll talk about a process that I utilized in, preparing for networking, whether you're networking with a few folks or whether you're networking with an individual. Then solutions, because basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a relationship and you're trying to create that connection, and you create it through solutions and value, and more importantly, developing the relationships. I always told people is that when I was in career transition, at any given time, there was 2 people out there talking about a career opportunity that I might fill. It's my job to really create a relationship with one of those 2 people, and I'm going to have to do it through networking. So first things first, I tell people, who are you? Do you really know who you are? I just spoke with a CEO this morning before I started work, and he's been out for a couple of months, and he said, I read your book, George, and believe me, he goes, it helped set a foundation. He said, because, I was always a head down, get in the job, get things done and everything else. And this time really helped me reflect of the things that I was doing versus the things that I want to do. So this is really a time for me to really evaluate what am I wanting to do going forward, and then, creating a value proposition around it, right? What makes you different than, let's say if you're in sales, what makes you different than the 12 other salespeople that are out in the waiting room to interview for this job, or looking for this particular company, or looking for this particular product? What makes you unique and different? Above all, you've got competition. So what makes you different than the other 12 people, right? You've got to be able to introduce yourself. And it's one of the things that I talk about as far as that elevator pitch. To me, elevator pitches, I say they're always so 2016 because that was really the first time I was in career transition and I heard that, but they never rolled off my tongue. And what I found out is that they sounded so generic that it sounded like, if 12 people said something about themselves, it was all the same. I'm an executive that has 20 years of experience with an MBA. I started sounding like Charlie Brown's teacher, right? You really got to figure out who you are. One of the things that I did prior to going out and networking is I just simply took that 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, put it on a landscape, and I basically stated, 3 individual lines. And for me, I was looking for a new job. So I basically, in the left-hand side, I put out, what was my last job? What was the things that I liked about it? I always try to keep it positive, right? Was it a title? Was it commute? Was it culture? Was it the salary? Was it the people, right, that I worked with individually? But then what I would do is I would kind of daydream, jump over that middle for a second and go way to the right and say, if I won the lottery tomorrow, what are the things that I would truly love, inspire to do, want to do, etc.? Again, it could be title. It could actually even be location, as we're talking about. Minus this week, it was pretty depressing. You come out at the second week of October and you already got 6 inches of snow on the ground. You might want to think about, hey, maybe it's time to me finally moving down to Texas, Austin, Texas, or over in Florida, etc. Right? So, and then I came back to the middle and I said, okay, I'm going to take a little bit of what I just experienced and a whole lot of the things that I want to experience. And that really came up to basically who I am and what I wanted to do. Great thing. I did it on a Saturday morning. Took me a couple hours, but it gave me a baseline and it helped me prepare for my networking meetings when people started to ask, who are you? How can I help, etc. So I tell people, before you even sit down to network, you got to find out, who are the people you're wanting to network with. All too many times people tend to network with the same type of people. Like, for example, salespeople will network with salespeople. And that's all fine and good. But the fact is that you may be in a situation where it may not be a salesperson that's going to help you either land a client, get you a job, etc. So you've got to find out and round out, making sure that you're attacking all the disciplines. So, for example, when I was looking for a COO position, I was looking to network with CEOs, people who would hire me, board members, people who would potentially hire me, private equity firms, people who would hire me, right? So that was me, my target. And then I always told people, it's like, part of the first networking meeting is first the introduction. We'll talk about the value proposition statement, but we'll also talk about how can I help you? And even though it's a very simple question, people tend to really struggle to answer it. And Bob and everybody else really knows that we're humans. We want to help people. Genuinely want to help people, right? But we got to make sure that we're pretty clear as to what we want help with. And all too many times we don't have that nailed down in our first meeting. So I tell people, define your swim lanes. Mine was always 2. I always said that you want to make sure it's very simple. It's always something that you could carry in one hand. So 2 things I can carry in one hand, right? So I always told people, for my example is I have an ideal situation. And then I also have an opportunity where I'm looking to network with those people I just talked about, board members, the CEOs, people who would hire me if I was in career transition. If I was looking to sell a product, maybe it's customers that would potentially buy my product, right? I'm looking to network with these types of companies or these types of people in these positions. But always, try to keep your swim lanes to 2. Don't have 18, 15, because then, I say if you're everything, then you're nothing, right? And then you define your day in the life, right? So if you're out either trying to use networking to launch your business, or you're looking to network just to find an opportunity, you have to create a structure in your day, right? Because for whatever reason, if you've left a job and you're starting your own business, or you're starting to ramp up your business, or you've left a job and you're looking to find a job, you left a structured life. So you've got to create a structure. If you don't, even though every day might feel a month, you look back on it and 3 months go by really fast. So it's really important. We'll talk about day in the life a little bit later. So my question is to the group, which one are you? Are you the social butterfly, the mingler, the socializer? Or are you like me, prior to two career transitions, even though my role required me to be out in front of people, if I went to a social event, I would be perfectly fine sitting in a corner having a drink by myself. So which one are you? Extrovert?
I love all the words underneath there, George. A solitudinarian.
Yeah, that one was very unique. I said, you know what? My son is he's an extreme introvert. He does not come out of his room, and he's 21 years old, right? He's going through his third year of college, but he's perfectly fine with himself. And I mean, I'm a pretty introvert and I can relate, but he is literally on a different scale.
Yeah, I think, from taking all the different assessments, I always come out a little bit introverted because of where I get my energy and restoration. But I have no problem jumping into that extrovert side, right? And that sounds a lot like what you developed, being an introvert, but then you needed to interact out in the marketplace. So we can certainly, no matter where we come from, we can interact and network with others, especially if we make it others centered. You're there to help them, right?
Yeah.
Would you be able to at some point throw ambivert in there?
What's that?
Ambivert, which is a combination of the two.
Yeah, could possibly be. I mean, I talk right now about, if you're an introvert, how do you cross over to the dark side, the Star Wars series or whatever. But the question is always, do people know, is the world tailored to extroverts or introverts? I forgot to put introverts, but because the fact is that the world is tailored toward extroverts. So a lot of times people tend to feel kind of out of sync or out of the know. I mean, you've heard a lot of these particular sayings. So some of the things that helped me transition to being an introvert to an extrovert was, taking small steps, right? Because again, no one is going to jump in the deep end of the water of networking, right? If you're an introvert, right? So I always tell people, start small. Maybe you don't do as many as I did in my second career transition. My second career transition, for 5.5 months, I was averaging 7 meetings a day, face-to-face before COVID, coffee meetings, right? That was like over 746 people in 5.5 months. That's a lot of people, right? I would have never done that the first time around. The first time around, it took me 13 months to network with about 424 people, which averaged 3 a day. But what I found is in my first career transition, it took me networking to get my last job before. And so I knew the value of that. So I just said, hey, I'm going to turn around and blow this up and I'm going to do twice as much. But you've got to ease into it. So I tell people, one of the things you can do if you're an introvert is, get introduced by people that you do know, right? So they're not so much of a stranger. You have some kind of common discussion when you first sit down, because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to establish a relationship the first couple of minutes. And if you're introduced by somebody you know really well, hey, that's part of the discussion where you get commonality and that introvert kind of slides out, the extrovert comes a little bit long. That's what helped me. The other thing is that learning to get a likability. This is one of the things that I had to learn because in the military, they told you not to smile, right? So most of my life, I don't smile. So I've been told a lot of times, George, you got to smile more. George, you got to smile more. Well, it really was evident when I was in career transition is in order for you to be approachable, you got to be able to smile, be inviting, speak clear. Don't speak like this, right? Can you hear me right now? And then clarifying questions, right? When people are asking things, make sure that they're open-ended questions. They're not just yes, no, and then there's about crickets, right? Between 3 or 4 minutes. And the best thing to do is ask for advice. People love to talk about themselves. You know, my first meetings, I always try to manage them in a 70-30 split. You know, let them talk about themselves 70% of the time, because then it shows you're genuinely interested. And what I found is when you are genuinely interested in people, you're taking notes, etc., people are more willing to help you in anything that you need. And then, you know, I'd say don't control yourself all the time. Be yourself. A lot of times people, it's almost if you put a needle close to them, they would pop, right? They're always on guard. They're like really stiff and everything else, like maybe military attention, right? Where you're rigid and everything else. Well, that will definitely be energy sucking. To Bob's point, you know, it takes a lot of energy in order to network, right? So you need to make sure that you're not always tied up and loose. Be yourself, you know? And then I tell finally, maybe there's an opportunity where you can find commonality through maybe a hobby or a social event or whatever that you may be going to. Church, prime example. So many different levels of people at church and everything else that are more than willing to help you. You know, it's just making sure that you understand your ask, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Maybe you've written an article, right? And you guys have a common discussion on that article. If you're talking with somebody in HR and you wrote a recent article on culture. I just got off an earlier video where somebody was talking about the transitions of cultures as companies in this post-COVID come out. Great topic. So day in the life. This is one of the things that I kind of created in manufacturing, right? To supervisors. It's like there's certain things that you do before, during, and after the shift of each shift in manufacturing. And so I said, you know what? It probably is evident in probably any particular part of your life is that if you don't create structure in your life, your day can go by and you can turn around and waste it, right? Recruiters have a day in the life, right? They do certain things and certain tasks and they've got everything split out. Entrepreneurs have a scheduled shift, a whole day in which they got things that they do. They get up at a certain morning, they exercise, they do certain tasks, etc. I mean, I'm sure you've read the books with Simon Sinek and Elon Musk, etc. And these guys have a structured process, and it doesn't deviate, right? And this is what I have found that's helped people, and myself included, really be the most efficient. And that doesn't mean that you can't adjust and change every couple of weeks. Look at the things that you started. Like I use a model on a Saturday every 3 to 4 weeks. It's a reminder. Everything's on Google Calendar. When I was in career transition, my Google Calendar was hooked up to my phone, and I had so many updates. George, do this. George, do that. It was kind of like, my second wife telling me all the things that I needed to do when I needed to do them, right? But it helped me. And part of my model was on Saturday every 3 to 4 weeks, from 7:35 to 8:15, I'd have a stop-start continue model session with myself. And I'd say, what's the last couple of weeks, what's really worked well? I'm going to continue to do that. What are some of the things that I've been doing the last 3 or 4 weeks is just a waste of time, right? I'm not going to do those. And then the last 15 minutes, I would brainstorm and try to come up with 1 or 2 more things that I'm going to do differently this week. For example, cold call. Ironically enough, even though it's old school, a lot of the old school methods work still today because very few people use them. And it helped me. But you've got to create a cadence when you're networking. So what angles do you approach? I tell people everything. So don't be afraid to go direct. So that's how I got my role here at Rudolph Technology /Onto. I saw the job posted. I basically created the 300 characters that you're allowed in the LinkedIn introduction to the CEO of the company. And I basically stated who I am in one sentence, my value proposition in one sentence, and what I'm looking to do next sentence. And he called me back in 3 days. And 5 weeks later, I got an offer. But just make sure your message is clear and concise, because you only have 300 characters to make a wow. Cold call. On a dare, it was part of one of my Stop, Start, Continue weeks. On a dare, I was asked, why don't you cold call some CEOs in the in the Minneapolis area? And so I decided, okay, I'll take you up on that. Now I thought about it and I said, okay, CEOs are very busy, especially the ones that I'm going to turn around and attack, because we're not talking about small CEOs of $5 million companies. We're talking about billion-dollar companies. These are the CEOs I'm going to reach out to. So it took me about 3 hours to create a message that I left to 10 CEOs, and 7 of them returned my call. Doug Baker of Ecolab was the first guy to respond, and I was floored. 2 days later, he calls. He's like, George, this is Doug. Sorry for the delay. Now, here's a CEO that's carrying millions of dollars in salary, running a billion-dollar organization, and he first responds to me saying, I apologize for being delayed. I'm like, oh, wow. First of all, I didn't know who it was, because the only Bob, or excuse me, was the guy down, Doug Baker. The only Doug I knew was down in Florida. This guy didn't sound like Doug, because Doug had a little bit of Southern twang, and this didn't sound like him, right? And so I said, all right, Doug, how you doing? And he goes, you called me. I did. CEO of Ecolab. I was like, oh my God, this works, right? And my message was like this. I called him after hours, left him a voicemail, and of course it was his admin that listened to it first. But my message was, Doug, this is George Murray. I'm a recently transitioning executive where I took a company from 100 to 180 million in 18 months. I'm looking to network in the medium to large business community, and I would love your advice. Click, 27 seconds. And believe me, that's a value proposition. That's not an elevator pitch that says, this is who I am, this is what I've done, and it takes 3 or 4 minutes, right? Because by the first minute, he's hanging up the phone, not going to return the call. He called me and he said, George, I'd really like to know how you took a company from 100 to 180 million in 18 months. I said, well, some of it was organic and some of it was inorganic through a merger and acquisition. Okay. But the point is I was willing to do something different out of my comfort zone. So cold calling still works. Make sure your message is clear and concise. I always tell people, give them a taste of the cupcake, but don't tell them the ingredients. And then, you want to be unique and different. Don't try to be like everybody else. And that's what I found in those elevator pitches. Boy, I sit in so many of those networking meetings that, people were in career transition, et cetera. And it sounded like everybody sounded the same. I mean, the guy that started it from the 7th guy, it didn't sound like any difference. This guy had 20 years, that guy had 20 years. That guy had an MBA, that guy had an MBA. It's like, okay, so what makes you different, right? So my introductions, my value proposition was very different. You have to make yourself unique and different in 30 seconds or less. So some of my introductions were when people said, tell me about yourself in that first part of that networking meeting was, I'm an executive that takes flat to declining companies. I turn them around on the top and the bottom line while injecting a more equally accountable work culture. Do you know anybody that needs somebody like that? That's 23 seconds. That's the top, the bottom line, and the culture. And I can tell you in the last 10 years, companies are struggling in one, if not all of those areas. And then what happens is they turn around and say, hey, listen, you know what? Tell me about how you drove sales. You're zeroed in. The same principle applies if you're trying to generate customers, right? If you're looking for a customer out there, or you're looking to sell business, sell product to a business or a service to a business, you've got to develop what makes you different than unique. I mean, if you're in a market that's flooded with, let's say, financial services, right? I don't know if there's anybody out there financial service, but again, what makes you different and unique, right? Specific words, that passionate words that really come from the core that you really believe, and it doesn't sound scripted. So again, got to make sure that you're being unique out there, you're out there. And then the other thing that I used that was old school as well was a 10, 10, and 10 process. So I did 10 letters and emails a day, 10 calls a day, and my goal, my metric, was try to get to 10 meetings a day. Now, in my 2 career transitions, I think about a dozen times I got to 9 meetings a day. And believe me, those are exhausting. From the 7 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock at night, driving everywhere, meeting these folks. But that was a process that I helped create a pipeline of folks to meet with. And what I did was I would send letters out, very brief, type them out. Congratulations. I took the business journal section on Monday's Star Tribune, the movers and the shakers, and I just sent a letter to these people. And I said, hey, congratulations either on the promotion or the new assignment, the new role. And then I would take 2 or 3 more lines that said, here's my value proposition. I'd love to have maybe a video conference with you, get some insight, right? And those meetings or those letters, I did 10 a day, representing 5 days of the week for 10 weeks. And out of 500 people, over 400 people responded, which blew me away, right? The responses I get, George, I only get spam and bills. I never get a letter, right? People actually write letters anymore, but it was literally 400 words or less. It was short and concise, and it differentiated me. I physically signed them. I hand outlined their address, and I mailed them. And by Wednesday, Thursday, they were calling me to set meetings up. So another old school tactic that works if you want to turn around and generate network, meetings, leads, etc. So what do you do before you get to the meeting? So one of the things that I learned in career transition with networking with a lot of people is that you have to do your homework. You're not out of school yet. We're never out of school. We're always continued learners until the day that we're called upstairs, right? And so one of the things that I would do is I'd have a lot of these books, and I still have a lot of those, probably about 40 of these books. I would basically outline, who am I going to network tomorrow with? Each one represented a page. Their name was up on the left-hand corner. I would do some homework on LinkedIn. Okay, Bob and I, how many common connections do we have? Maybe we have 78. But I would pick 3 or 4 people that I really knew well, because what's going to happen is that's what you're going to sit down and you're going to start with. Hey, how do you know Bob, right? You know, I met Bob here and here and here, and I did this and this. That generates the conversation. That brings you into the fold of the people. That brings that connection that you're wanting to do, because the introduction will get you the meeting. What you're trying to do in that first 7 minutes, 7 seconds, etc., is develop that connection. Connection is, what do you have in common? Maybe if you did the homework on the person, maybe they went and graduated from the same college you did. Or maybe they worked at a supplier that you used to work with. But what you're trying to do is find that common ground. Because in that first networking meeting, you're really trying to establish what I would consider cheerleaders, whether they're cheerleaders for your business or cheerleaders for your opportunity to land your next role, right? So that's what I did before you did the meeting. And it also gave those people that you were first meeting the respect that you took the time, because there's something more expensive than money, and it's time, because you can never give it back. So if they're willing to give you 20 or 30 minutes, you should at least spend some time to get to know them. I always tell people at any given stage, whether it's interviewing, whether it's meeting with folks, whether it's driving, you're trying to drive business, you always want to leave them with a wow, right? Wows can be several things. It could be free samples. I know that one person I networked with, she brought cupcakes, made her unique. And that was 3.5 years ago, and I still know her because she's the cupcake person, right? But the fact is, again, unique and different. Maybe not in these particular times, but back then, yeah, hey. The other thing I tell people is maybe you want to give them, if you are just a free assessment, give something free away, because in free in return, it'll start to turn around amount for you. Like I've been speaking a lot for probably the last 4 or 5 years, and then people started pushing on me to say, hey, you probably should write a book. And then I started writing the book and got the book complete. And now I start to generate revenue both on the speaking circuit, on the consulting circuit, coaching circuit, as well as the book, right? So You just don't know. But I think the thing is once you give something away of yourself, you're going to give more in return. Again, you might want to do if you're working with an individual or business, maybe you do a presentation or an evaluation. I actually did a couple of evaluations on certain businesses when I was doing some side work for businesses that were struggling either on the top line or profitability. I would go in there and say, hey, you know what? I'll give you the first hour. I'll walk through the facility with you, and I'll give you my take and where we can turn around and save money. And then based on that, we can agree to move forward. And here's my rate. Right? I always tell people is that you want to make yourself differentiation from everybody else, give away something of yourself, because then it will return back to you in many fold. And one of the things that I also want to share that Bob and others have shared earlier on is in career transition. If you're in career transition, there's two roads you can take. You can slip down to the negativity, because I guarantee you there's going to be more downs and up in career transition. Or you can take the higher road that says, I'm going to be better. That was mine. I was always going to be better than the person I was yesterday. Not compare myself to somebody else, but this is who I'm going to be. And part of my process was every morning I would give gratitude. Gratitude for the Lord that says, hey, you know what? I'm vertical. I'm still pumping. I still have a house over my head. Still have a loving family. And then I would start by saying, you know what, please help these people. Maybe they're worse, because if you think your situation, all you got to do, there's not very far that you have to look that people are in much difficult, more situations. Maybe they're going through cancer. Maybe their parent just passed away, etc. Right? So those are the things that you can give out and say, hey, I pray for this person, pray for that person. And to me, that helped me center myself every morning to say, I'm thankful for these things in my life. And then I really attack the day a lot different than if I were to turn around and just look at, why is this happening to me? So one of the last things, when you go through either you get introduced to folks through a common connection, or you're networking, it's extremely important that you follow up. So one of the things I always tell people is that if you get introduced by somebody either through LinkedIn or through a common email, it's very important for you to respond in a timely manner, 24 to 36 hours, because these people are putting their reputation on their line to give you an introduction to somebody that they know pretty well, right? So it's important to be responsive. I can't tell you how many people I've done that, and weeks later, and it's like, I literally have to call them out. I'm like, you're making me look bad, right? The other thing is that always follow up with the people that you network with, whether it's for a business opportunity, whether it's for a job opportunity, or whether it's just networking. Always follow up with a short email and make sure that you reference something that you talked about, the notes that you took, right? Because again, that will make you unique and different, because, hey, he remembered that. He actually took a note on that, right? One of the examples I use is a gentleman that I have networked with for probably about 4 or 5 years. We've introduced people back and forth. And our first meeting, the first 15 minutes was about how his daughters went through scholarships on swim. My daughter was in high school at the time. She had just started swim, a little late in the swim career life. But we just talked about that. Well, how did they do this? And this is what they did, and this is what they did. And ever since then, that's really been our common connection is that both our daughters went through swim. His daughters were able to get scholarships, and that's how we got connected, right? And then, follow up every 4 to 6 weeks. Make sure, even if it's a job opportunity or a business opportunity, they may not be interested now. Maybe it's 4 to 6 weeks. Maybe it's once a quarter. Maybe you ask them, you know what, if you're not ready now, maybe would you be okay with me following up with you in January? Perfect. Put it on the calendar, right? Then I always tell people one thing to keep top of mind if you're in career transition or if you're out there trying to really vamp your business is every 5 to 6 weeks, just a general update. 3 or 4 lines. What have you been doing? And 3 or 4 lines, what are you looking for? Because again, people don't want to forget you. It's just that life happens and time happens, right? And if you're not updating them every 5 to 8 weeks, if you're in career transition, or if you're landed, you should do it at least twice a year so that people, the next time they meet you, is not the next time you're looking for business because you're desperate or you're looking for a next career opportunity. So that's the summary. That's kind of all the things that you need to do in order to really get on a networking path. You can gauge it. I started, like I said, my first career transition, I was doing 3 a day. I really vamped it up towards the end of my first career transition. I was probably up to 5 or 6. In my second career transition, I started off at 7 a day. Just fed the pipeline and used all those examples.